This is Gemara Zevachim, Daf Samach Beis. We're holding on the very top of Samach Beis, Amid Aleph, and we're in the middle of discussing the Mizbeach of the Batei Mikdashim, particularly the second Beis HaMikdash, and how it was larger than the Mizbeach we originally discussed of Moshe Rabbeinu. And now we're going to discuss how the Mizbeach of the second Beis HaMikdash was larger than the Mizbeach of the first Beis HaMikdash. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef, top line, Samach Beis Amid Aleph, Lav Hainu de Danya, is this not Pshat in the Brayso? Vayachinu was the Mizbeach al Mechayin Oisav. They put the Mizbeach on its foundation. What does this mean? She'egia l'saymi daisav, that the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, they calculated the exact measurements of the Mizbeach. L'soif midaisav, whereas Shlomo HaMelech was not able to do that, and only because Bisman second Beis HaMikdash, when the Anshe Knesset Gedolah went l'soif midaisav, were they able to make the Mizbeach the quote unquote appropriate measurement, which was larger than the Mizbeach of Shlomo HaMelech. Ask the Gemara 1 second. V'aksiv hakol b'chsav miyad Hashem Allah yiskil. But the pasuk says it's all b'chsav in writing, as was explained from the Yad Hashem. David HaMelech tells Shlomo that he got the exact specific dimensions, instructions, directives of the Beis HaMikdash. So how can he tell me that only the Anshe Knesset Gedolah knew, but Shlomo didn't know precisely what he mean? David said he gave it all over. So says the Gemara, Ela Amar Rav Yosef, Kra Ashkechach V'darash. Vayomer David, teaches David HaMelech, Zehu Beis Hashem Elokeinu, Elokim, V'zeh Mizbeach Lo'ila, L'Yisrael. This is Mizbeach of Hashem Elokim. And this is the house of Hashem Elokim, and this is the Mizbeach of the Karbanos of Klal Yisrael. So the pasuk says the Beis HaMikdash and the Mizbeach right next door to each other. So what does this show us? Ki bayis, that the Mizbeach is like the bayis. Ma bayis shishim ama of Mizbeach shishim ama. That's how large the Mizbeach was able to be. And so Rav Yosef is explaining, in as much as David HaMelech, yes, transmitted to Shlomo, however, the Anshe Knesset Gedolah understood deeper, understood more precisely what the message of David HaMelech was, and therefore they were able to create the Mizbeach, the appropriate numbers. And there, what is that number? The maximum being 60 amos. So Bishlama, so says the Gemara, 8 lines down. First word in line is Bishlama. Bishlama bayis min surasa. I understand that. 1 second, we just lost the. 1 second. Okay. Bishlama bayis min surasa. By the Beis HaMikdash, we know where it's supposed to be. Meaning this second Beis HaMikdash, they knew where it's supposed to be. El Mizbeach Minayada. Where do they know where precisely the Mizbeach was supposed to be? Amar Rav Elazar, Ru Mizbeach Banui. They saw the Mizbeach built to Michael Hasar Gadol. Oimedu Makriv Alav. And Michal, the Sar Gadol, the great officer, was standing and Makriv on it. Mefarshim explain that in Shamayim there is a Yerushalayim Shel Lamayla corresponding to Yerushalayim Shel Mata, and Hashem showed the Mizbeach in this Yerushalayim Shel Mata Mala with the Malachim upon it, so they knew precisely where in our world it's supposed to be. Rav Yitzchak Navcha Amar Efarei Shel Yitzchak Ra'u Shemunach Ba'isai Makim. The Ephar of Yitzchak Avinu they saw was placed in that area, and that's how they knew that that's where the Mizbeach goes. Rav Shmuel Bar Chmeini Amar Mikol Abayis Kulai Heiria Ureach Kita Ires. The entire Beis HaMikdash, they smelled the smell. I'm sorry, I don't really know what's going on with the highlighting today. I apologize. Misham eriach reach evarim. So we're discussing that again. Bisman second Beis Hamikdash. How do they know? Says the Gemara, fascinating nisim that they saw that in the whole area of the Beis Hamikdash they smelled ketayres, but in the precise area that the mizbeach was supposed to be, they smelled the reach evarim. Another pshat. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan, Shosh neviim alu imayim min hagoyla. 3 neviim went from Bavel. Echad she'ir lem al mizbeach. One told them the size of the mizbeach. V'echad she'ir lem al makim al mizbeach. V'echad she'ir lem shemakrivim afal pishein vayis. So 3 went up, giving eidos on what was supposed to be the size of the mizbeach, the location of the mizbeach, and the fact that they would have karbanos, even though the Beis Hamikdash was not yet built. B'masnita tana, the Brisa teaches us was ben Yaakov Aimer Shloisha Neviim alu imahem min hagoyla. 3 Neviim went from Bavel, from Galus. Echad she'ilem ha-mizbeach. So according to this pshat, the first one gave edus on both ha-mizbeach, and the second gave edus that they're allowed to bring karbanos even though there's no Beis Hamikdash yet. And one gave edus on the Torah shetikasev ashuris. They elaborate that the reason that the way the Torah is written is ashuris, which of course is the way that we write the Sefer Torah Tefillin and Mezuzos nowadays, even though, says Rashi, originally it was written be'ivris, but Ezra taught them how to write it be'ashuris, and that was the edus that came bisman, the second Beis Hamikdash. So says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, diving a little bit deeper, the second line, into dimension, size, reasons of the Mizbeach. Keren v'kevesh v'yisoid. The keren, the horns, the kevesh, the ramp, the yisoid. The base of the Mizbeach, the riboy, and the squareness of the Mizbeach, ma'akvin, are essential. Midas arkay, midas rachbay, midas koy masai, ein ma'akvin. So says the Gemara, really a follow-up almost of the whole previous discussion, that indeed the midas, the precise measurements, that's not ma'akim, and as we see that at different times there were different measurements. Bisman Moshe, Bisman Bayis Rishon, Bisman Bayis Sheni. But says the Gemara, you know what is ma'akev? What is ma'akev are the koronos, the horns, the ramp, and the yisoid, and the squareness. Minan, immediately, where do we know this from? On the 4th Y line, Amar Avuna Markra, HaMizbeach, says the Basik, Kol Makom Shenemar HaMizbeach La'akev. And where does it say HaMizbeach in the Torah? By the koronos, the kevesh, the yisoid, and the riboy. Ask the Gemara, 1 second, let me add to Kior L'Rebbe, V'soivev, L'Rav Yosi B'Rav Yehuda, Hachanami de Me'akvi, is the design, the Kior, according to Rebbe, the ledge, according to Yosi B'Rav Yehuda, that should also be Ma'akiv. Why? Dechsev, and Asat Oisai, Tachas Karkoiv, HaMizbeach Melmata, placed under the Karkoiv, V'tanya, Izeu Karkoiv, what does that mean? Rabbi Yomer Zeu Kior, this is the design, Rabbi Yehuda Yomer Zeu Asaivev, this is the ledge. So what do we see? We see that it says HaMizbeach by these two details, teaching us that these items should also be ma'akev. And again, the kiyar is the decorating panels on the side, or the saiviv going around it. Answers the Gemara, you're right, and yes, those are ma'akev. Titania, we learned in a brayso, on that day, nifkama karen HaMizbeach, a horn of the Mizbeach was damaged. Ve'viu bul shel melech, and they brought a fistful, a bowl, a handful of salt, ustamua, and they damaged, and they covered over the damaged part of the Mizbeach. V'loy mivnei, and not because shekashel ha'avaida. So why do they cover it over? Elishlo yiru Mizbeach bagum, they don't want it to be seen. Shekol Mizbeach shein like karen v'kevesh v'yisoid v'riboy. Pasol And now here it is. So proves the Gemara that which we just said is true, that it is part of the essentials of the Mizbeach. Continues the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, 8 lines from the bottom. First one line is Yehuda Izeu Karkoiv. Bein Karen the Karen, the area between the horns. Makam Hilach Ragli Akayanim Amam, the area where the Kahanim walk, which is 1 amma. Atu Kahanim Bein Karen the Kevin Have Azli, says the Gemara, really? Is that where that amma area, Atu Kahanim, the Kahanim walk only in that area? But they can't, because they're going to hit into the Kranais. No, the Brisa means say, and the area of 1 amma. Meaning, what's the Brisa teaching us? That the Karkaiv is the area of the horn, and the area of the 1 amma walkway that they walked, which means very importantly that you have the horns in the corners, and the amma walkway is inside it, adjacent to the horns. That's the amma walkway that they walked. Ask the Gemara 1 second. So says the Gemara, it says it's tachas karkavai, which seemingly indicates it's on the side of the Mizbeach. And we're learning that the karkaiv refers to this area that they walked next to the Kranais. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Trei Havu. There are 2 karkaivs. Chad l'noi, v'chad l'kohanim d'loi nishtarku. One is for decoration, and one is for the kohanim, that they would not slip. Those are the 2 karkaivim, and that we reconcile the 2 braisos. And now we continue. Midas arkai, midas rachvai, umidas kaima asai. The midah, the measurements of those ein ma'akvin amar mani ubavad shleiv chasenu mimizech shasamaish, says the Gemara. It's not ma'akiv being bigger. However, it of course has to be at least the size that Moshe Rabbeinu made. V'kama amar Rav Yosef. How much is that? Amma. Mechakeku alev. Rav Yosef laughed. Says the pasuk Chamisha Roichef Ravu Hayeh. I don't understand, says the Gemara. How can it be 1 amma? Amar Yam Mizbeach. Amar Le'abaya. Tilma Makoim Ma'aracha means the place of the Ma'aracha, the place of the fire on top of the Mizbeach. That's what it means. It's 1 amma. Kamar Mar. Amar Le responds Rav Yosef Mar the Gavar Abahu Yada. My Kamina, Mar Abaye is a great man. He knew what I meant. Meaning, he says, Shkoyach, that's what I meant when I said 1 amma. Indeed, he was referring to the place of the Ma'aracha. Kari Alayu, says the Gemara. Rav Yosef says about them, Karu Alayu, he labels them, Bini Ketura. As we turn over to Samach Beis Ben Beis, I apologize, the highlighting just paused. I'll be back in a moment. Bnei Keturah, the sons of Keturah. Keturah had multiple children, Avram Avinu, but the Yidden came from, of course, Yitzchak. So Rav Yosef says that those who are arguing, although they came from Avram, are not behaving like the Bnei Avram Yitzchak, the Yaakov. They're behaving like the other children, the Bnei Keturah. Quite a derogatory way of responding, but that is how he's commenting on their lack of understanding of what he said. But the top line is the sons of Rav Tarfon's sisters have a Yasvi Kamei de Rav Tarfon, the sitting in front of Rav Tarfon, Pascha v'Amar. Rav Tarfon began saying, "Vayosef Avram vayikach Isha ushma Yoichani." And Avram went and took a wife whose name was Yoichani. Says the Gemara, Amrulei, Keturah Kesef. What do you mean? It says Keturah. Kari Aleim, Bnei Keturah. He calls them Bnei Keturah. Why are you diving in? What are you doing? Rav Tarfon purposely, says Rashi, misread this pasuk, so they would jump up and say that, and then you'd be able to give them this derogatory remark that you're like Bnei Keturah. basically putting them in their place. Back to our conversation of the Mizbeach. Amar Abaye, 5 lines down. Bar Huna, Amar Rav Chama Bar Guria. Gezirin Sha'asa Moshe. The wood that Moshe made for the Mizbeach, Arkan Amma, the length was an Amma. Verachvan Amma, the Ovyan, and how was the thickness? Kemachak Goidesh Sa. The thickness was the same as that which is used to remove the excess of the volume of a saw. What does that mean? That means that they would pour like flour or any dry grain into a utensil, and then what? They would have to smooth out the top. That level, that thickness, was the thickness of the wood that they used for the Mizbeach, for the Maracha. Amar Rav Yirmiyah ba'ama giduma. Says Rav Yirmiyah, this means a short amma. That these were not the long ammas, these were shorter ammas. Amar Rav Yosef, v'lavhainu dechsev, this is not lavhainu detanya, excuse me. Is that which the Brisa says? You don't want the wood protruding from the Mizbeach at all, and therefore, excuse me, it does not have to be a short amma. Meaning, says the Gemara, if the whole issue is you don't need the wood going over the side of the Mizbeach, so what's the big deal? The Mizbeach is much larger than an amma, so you could have your blocks of wood an amma by a full amma, and it still will fit perfectly. Tenan Hasam, 3 lines in the wide lines. The ramp was on the south side of the Mizbeach. How long was the ramp? 32 amos long, 16 amos wide, just to realize that this Mizbeach was very large. Just, something I don't think we compute so properly. 32 amos is we're looking at about 50 feet was the length of this Mizbeach, of the ramp, excuse me. And the width, 16 amos, is about 24 feet. That's a massive runway. This was the ramp of the Mizbeach. Says the Gemara in the last narrow line, Minan immediately knows from Arvuna Markra, Shachar Asal Yerech Mizbeach Safaina. She Yerech a bit Safain. This teaches us that the thighs in the north, Upana Vidaraim, and the face in the south, the ramp is on the south. Ema Yerech asked the Gemara Besafan Upana Bitsafan, how do you know which way it goes? Amarava Rami Gavra Aape. But the man on the face, the pasuk is an analogy of a person lying on his face, whose the legs and face point in opposite directions, of course, the top and bottom of your body. Amarle Abaya Adarabba, says Abaya. Transfer Yisem Gavra. Sit the guy up straight, meaning how do you know at a Darsh this pasuk? Amarle Ravu Aksiv. It says squared, and therefore it's going to be a person who's lying down. But we need that word to show us that the Mizbeach is actually a square. Says the Gemara, Miksim Meruba? No, Ravua shows us lying down. Tamech Miksiv Ravutz? No, it says Ravua. Amarle, Ravua Ksiv Damashma Hachi, Umashma Hachi. And that's how we're going to know which side the Kevesh, the ramp, is going to be on. Another pshat says the Gemara, 5 lines into the white line. Tani Maisi La Mehacham. And the Brisa learns it from here. Titania, Rav Yuda Oimer, Uma'aloisehu Penais Kadim. And the ramp is eastward. What do we learn from here? A very famous and important rule. Call Pinai Shata Poine Lialaderech Yemewin. In Yidin, turn to the right. And therefore, it has to be, the ramp is in a way that when you turn to the right, you're going to be going Derech Yemin La Mizrach. You're going to be going eastward, and that only works, of course, if the ramp is on the south side. Says the Gemara, wait, small Mizrach. But maybe when you turn left, it's going to be eastward. Yam, Sha'asa Shleima, the Yam, the basin that Shleima HaMelech built. This was a mikvah for the Kehanim. It says the pasuk, Aimid al Shnei Asar Amudim Bakar Shleishim Shleisha Painim Ushleisha Painim Yama Ushleisha Painim Negba Ushleisha Painim Mizracha. So what do we learn out from this pasuk? From here we learn out that's what we know. It has to be to the right is east. You need it for the pasuk itself. Why does the pasuk use the word painim twice? turn. That's teaching us this additional rule that whenever you turn to the right. And now we continue with one more detail of the kevesh. Shal Rav Shimon ben Yosi ben Lakunya es Rav Yosi. Oima Amar Rashbi. Rashbi says as follows: Avir yish bin kevesh lemizbeach. There was a gap. Was there a gap between the ramp and the mizbeach? Amar Lai. Va'ata yata Omer Kain. Rav Yosi responds, do you really not believe me? Do you really not think so? Well, like Kvar Nemar, V'sisalesecha basar v'hadam, the oil of the meat and the blood. The pasuk says dam and basar together. What does that show us? That shows us that the two are similar. Madam bizrika, basar bizrika. Says the Gemara equates the two. That just like you throw the dam, you have to throw the basar. So what does that mean? If you're throwing the basar, that shows us that the ram seemingly is not all the way going to touch the mizbeach. Rather, it's going to be close by, and then it's going to have to be tossed on. Amar le'oi shiny oimer no oimi b'tzad maracha v'zoyrek. You're right, you throw it, but why do you have to throw it from far from the ramp? It means you stand next to the maracha, next to the fire, and you throw it in. Amar le'oi k'shata zoyrek l'maracha delukahu zoyrek. When the kohen throws the meat, does he throw it on the inside of the maracha, which is burning? Or does he throw it in the outer part, which is not burning? Uzarik. You throw it in the burning part. Hasam misham delay efsher. So that is because it's not possible, meaning he's proving you're right, you throw it. But not a din of throwing. It's because you're standing next to this bonfire, and right next to you there's no fire. The fire's inside, so of course you have to throw it. But you want to know the din of throwing, that's going to have to be because the ram doesn't meet all the way to the mizbeach. Rapapa Amar, a different source, different makar kidam adam, avir karka mafsikai, just like when it comes to the blood, the airspace of the ground separates afabasar avir karka mafsiko, proving that there has to be a space between the ramp and the mizbeach. And one last thing, I know I said one last thing a moment ago, but let's go one more drop. Amr Rav Yehuda shnei kavashim ketanim, says Rav Yehuda, two small ramps, yotzim and hakevesh, they protruded from the main ramp. Shebahan poinim liyasaid, from which the kehanim could turn to the base, villa seviv, and to the ledge. Umuvdalin mina mizbeach malay nima, it's a hair's breadth away. Mishum shenamar saviv, Ravavua amar Ravua, v'etzach lemechtav saviv, v'etzach lemechtav Ravua. Ravua dikos of Rachmana saviv hava amina da'agel magel. Kaz Rachmana Ravua, because Rachmana Ravua hava amina da'arach v'katin kaz Rachmana saviv. And that was that there were extra ramps on the ramp leading up. We'll stop over here. Hopefully in the next year we'll start with a picture of this, and then we'll move weiter.